in terms of what we have seen before. So, but we'll see if that's going to pay off here. A couple of players opting to drop something like the Flare Blitz for the Will-O-Wisp, but not this time around. And we are going to go ahead and get right into this best of 3 set to finish out our day. Jonathan Zuniga has the Amoonguss as well as the Raging Bolt going up against Tornadus and Kyogre from Jesse.
Yeah, so Jonathan making a great read off the bat and bringing 2 Pokemon that can really threaten this Kyogre. The big question is really, how does Tornadus approach this turn? Kyogre does have access to Protect, and like we saw from Tornadus earlier on in the stream, this one has Hurricane. So if you can manage to land a super effective Hurricane against that Amoonguss, that's going to do a ton of damage, but you have to respect the threat that these 2 Pokemon bring against Kyogre in particular.
For sure, because Raging Bolt is Thunderclap. The one thing that might be standing in its way of wanting to click that priority move is the fact that there is a Zarina that could switch in at any moment.
Yep.
But we're not going to see any switches here. It's just going to be the Terrestrialization right off the bat. And it is the Kyogre. So it's going to end up getting that Terra Grass. It's another way that you can save this Kyogre from some of those more offensive threats on Jonathan's team. The Grass type now making those electric type attacks not very effective, but still a safe play coming out from Jonathan to keep that Amoonguss safe, knowing that Tornadus is packing a Hurricane.
Yeah, and that would have connected with the Amoonguss as well, so that was a great call there from Jonathan. This also opens up the opportunity for Raging Bolt to hopefully tank this Water Spout. It is holding the Assault Vest item, so it should be on the bulkier side of things. And believe it or not, that is still a very bulky Pokemon there, despite that damage. And getting the Electro Web down as well will, I think, force Jesse's hand a little bit in these upcoming turns, as the Kyogre will take a speed drop from that Electro Web, and as a result, could actually underspeed the Raging Bolt this turn, depending on how they're trained.
Ooh, okay. Well, I mean, even though he took an Electro Web, Kyogre's still pretty healthy, so you can lock in another Water Spout, hoping that you're still going to be able to do enough damage there. But it's really interesting to see what the Tornadus went for. Went for the Rain Dance, expecting that a Groudon might switch in, but it's the Volt Switch first, so maybe there was a Groudon coming, but it wasn't a manual switch like Jesse was expecting. As the Raging Bolt leaves the field, we'll get a confirmation on whether or not that Groudon is going to come in instead.
I like, honestly, going for the Volt Switch there, because you know where the Terrestrialization is, you know that you're going to be able to connect that super effective damage, and presumably the Tornadus would probably just try to target down the Amoonguss again, as that's such a big threat. But now that Sun is on the field, even though the Kyogre is damaged only a little bit, it does allow Groudon to hold on through this hit. And interestingly enough, we are going to see Clear Smog clear the speed drop from that Electro Web earlier, but still does some great damage.
It's about the damage at the end of the day, right?
It really is.
Because there's no Tornadus left to be able to set the rain with Rain Dance. And if you want to get this Kyogre off the field, you've got to switch something in to take its place. And there's not a whole lot on Jesse's team that would be very happy about having to deal with a Precipice Blades or a Heat Crash from that Groudon.
I mean, that's ultimately, at the end of the day, I think one of the Achilles heels for these Kyogre matchups is that you don't have a bulky Pokemon that you can switch in. Even Zarina, even though it is the bulkier Pokemon on the team, just takes a ton of damage. And when you're playing a Pokemon that can threaten huge, super effective Fire-type damage with that Heat Crash, you cannot take that risk. So it's great that Kyogre has its speed back on the field, and I think at this range, an Origin Pulse should probably pick up the KO on that Groudon, but it's going to be a very tough ask for it, as it has to rely on either an Ice Beam, which is now no longer super effective, or Origin Pulse, which, as we know, is just as accurate as the Precipice Blades.
Well, Zarina was also hitting into the Groudon with like potentially super effective damage with either the Triple Axle or the Power Whip. So this is also a very safe Terrestrialization on that front as well. Power Whip is actually just going to miss anyway. So this Terrestrialization ensuring that the Groudon is going to survive a super effective attack like that, but it's also going to beef up this Heat Crash. So Zarina not going to be able to do anything else in this game number 1.
It's just the Kyogre left to attack. Spore will not put it to sleep, as it did protect this turn, but also because it has that Grass-type Terrestrialization. And now with Chien-Pao on the field, we're in a really unique spot, because Chien-Pao is really going to struggle against this Groudon, and its Sword of Ruin ability is also going to boost the damage that Groudon can do here.
Right, but Chien-Pao's still really fast.
It is still very fast.
Like base speed-wise, it's like still faster than Groudon, so it obviously depends on how they're trained. But the biggest key here is the fact that like you still have to deal with this Amoonguss that has Rage Powder.
Yep.
So We'll have to see.
I mean, I think the winning play here is that you have to go for your Ice Spinner into the Chen-Pao. Or excuse me, Chen-Pao has to go for Ice Spinner into Amoonguss, regardless if there's that Rage Powder or not. That does lock in the KO, and now Kyogre has the opportunity to even up the playing field and pick up the knockout on the Groudon, but it comes down to Origin Pulse. It does connect, and that is enough. So it looks like Jesse found an out to keep himself in the game.
Origin Pulse can be accurate all the time, sometimes.
It's one of those things where at the end of the day, I think there's a benefit to running Water Spout and Origin Pulse because you can guarantee the big damage while you're still at full health, but then you're not just out of luck when you do dip below that 50% health mark and you can sort of regain that power.
Well, the problem, though, is that Jonathan still has 2 Pokemon to be able to operate in the sun. So you're going to see the Photosynthesis activate on both the Raging Bolt and the Flutter Mane. And so, while we did see the Origin Pulse be able to connect onto the Groudon, that's why the Groudon is so effective on these teams.
Yep.
Is it's not just its own individual playmaking ability, but the ability to help support the other Pokemon on the team.
Yeah, and the way that Jonathan played this game as well, I mean, his first knockout was onto the Tornadus, which has Rain Dance. The Kyogre has been stuck on the field the entire game. When you're playing these classic weather wars, it always is the last weather standing that gives that player a huge advantage. And while it certainly isn't over, especially seeing Chen-Pao hold on thanks to that Focus Sash, it is a uphill battle for Jesse right now. He needs to find a KO here against the Raging Bolt.
But definitely can. I mean, the Ice Spinner, though, into the Flutter Mane is actually going to bring it down so low, but not nearly enough to be able to KO it. And the Ice Beam to follow it up is not going to be enough either. So Raging Bolt gets to go for a spread attack with the Electro Webs. Not going to miss a Chen-Pao, so it does secure the knockout. And Kyogre as well will fall to another Dazzling Gleam. No priority on this Pokemon. Could even just go for a Thunderclap if you wanted to, but it'll seal the deal.
Yeah.
Great job to Jonathan for this game 1.
I agree. I'm a little bit surprised that we didn't see Jesse target down that Raging Bolt a little bit more aggressively. It can't protect, and we know that the Flutter Mane as well is choice specs, but at the end of the day, it was the Raging Bolt that locked in that final knockout for Jonathan and winning game number 1 very comfortably. Winning that weather battle very early on, saving his Photosynthesis Pokemon for that end game while Sun was still active on the field. I think if Jesse wants to make any adaptations going into game number 2, he has to find a way to keep the weather around, which means possibly a later reveal of Kyogre or just trying to preserve that Tornadus for a couple more turns.
Yeah, there was that turn where Jesse was reading the just manual switch of the Groudon into the field, went for the Rain Dance on the Tornadus so that the Water Spout would do enough damage. And had that happened, that Groudon would have been out of there, right?
100%.
But the Volt Switch, which is a newer tech that we've seen on these Raging Bolts, has really paid off here. This is not the first time today that we've seen a Raging Bolt hold that Volt Switch, and it's been really powerful to just keep the momentum going and make sure that you can actually cycle through with some of the other things on the team, like getting the Groudon back in and out safely without having to open it up to knockouts like that.
Exactly, and that is the one thing that Jonathan's team has over Jesse's team. If you're just looking at, here's 2 weather players playing each other, Jonathan can go for that Volt Switch relatively safely thanks to the typing of the Raging Bolt and thanks to the Assault Vest. On Jesse's side of the field, he does have U-Turn on his Urshifu, but that's a choice scarf for Shifu. It's certainly going to be fast, but it's not going to have that bulk and that staying power, and that does change how you approach these switches. Going into game number 2, I would love to see that Urshifu lead, though, from Jesse, because at least you give yourself that option to pivot, but then it's like you're pivoting first thing in the turn. How much damage are you going to take for that?
And then if you're in a position 2, if you're against a Raging Bolt and you have the Thunderclap, right, like you still kind of run the same risk of you have to Terra the Urshifu to Terra Grass and, yada yada. So we're going to see a switch up for both of our players. It's going to be Amoonguss and Raging Bolt here for Jonathan, but it is the Zarina with the Kyogre this time around. No Tornadus just now.
I love seeing the Zarina here as a lead from Jesse because if you think about how game 1 number went, the Raging Bolt was such a big problem. Zarina has access to Triple Axle, which does hopefully 3 hits of Ice-type damage. Its held item Wide Lens makes that basically not guaranteed, but really darn close to it. And that will threaten a KO with the Amoonguss after some water spout damage from the Kyogre and potentially on this Raging Bolt as well, assuming the weather stays up. So now, even if Jonathan were to try and switch in that Groudon, he has to predict where the Ice-type attack is going, because if you switch Groudon in on an Ice-type attack, it's only a Ground type before that Terastallization. That's big, super effective damage.
Well, Kyogre is going to Terastallize anyway, because the other threat across the way, Amoonguss, you don't want to get put to sleep. So with the Spore as a threat, the Terra Grass on the Kyogre is going to leave that and its partner Zarina totally immune to that effect. But on the flip side of things, Jonathan is also going to go for a Terastallization, this time in the Raging Bolt with the Water Terra. So even if you were going to take a triple axle, that's no longer going to be super effective. And you're also not going to feel too bad about these water spouts either. That's a full power water spout onto both the Amoonguss and the Raging Bolt. It's going to bring the Amoonguss down into its Citrus Berry range, but look at how much better the Raging Bolt actually took that versus the last time.
And Serena did go for the triple axle into that Raging Bolt as well. So that is a great call from Jonathan for this turn. Does have to worry about a Power Whip in the next turn. But hypothetically speaking, with one Electro Web, you're probably going to outspeed the Zarina at this point in time. And it does have Draco Meteor as a very heavy hitting attack to sort of balance that out.
Ooh, the Clear Smog too, it actually does pepper down this Zarina just a little bit. But I don't know if you like... Do you mind that? I think the Kyogre is still in a pretty comfortable position.
I think so as well. It's a very tough spot, I will say, for this Amoonguss to be next to this Raging Bolt, where it's going for these Electro Webs, and then you're following that up with a Clear Smog. It's not ideal, and it does make me wonder like what Jonathan was thinking during the team building phase with Pollen Puff as a potential, but here we are.
Yeah, I think like you still value the damage more than I think you do mitigating the speed, because you're still going to be pretty fast. You also can't Thunderclap anyway.
True.
And you're probably not KOing with the Raging Bolt, but there is going to be a manual switch out. So the Raging Bolt's going to go away. We're going to see Groudon now take the field, and is it going to be susceptible to a lot of damage? Probably.
It's
Power
gonna
Whip too, it actually does hit.
I was gonna say, it's gonna be a Power Whip, and it's gonna be big damage, and the Ice Beam follow-up into that Amoonguss for the knockout there. So Groudon will manage to set up the Sun, but is basically within KO range from any attack here on the field. And we also do get that Flutter Mane out on the field once again with Choice Specs, so threatening some big damage there as well. We'll be able to benefit from this Photosynthesis. Jesse has no Rain Dance on the field, so he does have to potentially wait for a Pokemon to be knocked out to try and pivot in a Tornadus if he has that in the back of his party to set up that rain once again. It's interesting that he doesn't really want to switch the Kyogre out, but honestly, I don't blame him. It's such a powerful Pokemon, but there's just really a lot of maneuverability that you have to struggle with when you're playing this team.
I think it's a tough call because you're right. Like on the one hand, I think Kyogre is also sitting in a position where, well, I don't want to really be on the receiving end of like a Heat Crash or something from this Groudon, but on the flip side, I got to bring something else in that I hope that they get a benefit from. Because this arena is in a position where it's just going to get knocked out the Dazzling Gleam here, and then you have to sacrifice this Chien-Pao. What a huge risk you have to take. It goes down to the Focus Sash, and if Groudon's going to follow up with any damage here, it's over for that.
Yeah, and I do love the fact that Jonathan went for Heat Crash here, as that would have been enough to pick up the knockout on the Kyogre or the Zarina, depending on which Pokemon survived the Dazzling Gleam, and then you also could have picked up the knockout on the Tornadus or Chien-Pao as well. It's such good damage for a Pokemon that otherwise really struggled to find it. But here we are in this position where Jesse managed to get his Tornadus and his Kyogre, his lead from the previous game, as two of the final Pokemon standing. There is no more Sun on the field, and I don't think Groudon is going to be able to hang out for too much longer. If Jonathan switches it out here to try and get the Sun back, he's going to be taking a ton of damage on the Flutter Mane and on the Raging Bolt coming in.
Who doesn't love a good Tailwind and Water Spout?
It's a classic play
just
for
a
reason. And
exactly.
There are so many games as a Kyogre player where if you can maneuver to this end game where you have Tailwind and Water Spout support, it just opens doors.
Well, here's the play that you're talking about. We're going to see if it's going to pay off. Groudon has to leave the field in order to get some amount of weather control back, but it's going to open the door for Jessie to go for the Tailwind control, get this speed online, get this Kyogre to outspeed the Flutter, and with the Water Spout into both, it's going to secure the knockout onto the Flutter. Critically, though, this Raging Bolt does not go down. That Water Tera being extra effective to make sure that that Raging Bolt's going to stick around. Now, the Kyogre's still not a water type, so this Thunderclap isn't going to be doing enough, but there's so much that you have to get through health-wise on that Kyogre. It's going to be very difficult to take out from this position.
It is, and also, I think regardless of the weather at this point in time, your Pokemon are in the red. They're going to be taking a lot of damage. Kyogre
and you got the Rain Dance.
Is guaranteed to go faster. Your win con at that point in time is just hope that your opponent doesn't click Rain Dance followed up by Water Spout. So we do see Jonathan lock in the forfeit to bring us into a game number 3, and I gotta say, the adjustment from Jessie to have that Chien-Pao swap in, get KO'd immediately on the swap so that he could align the Kyogre and the Tornadus together in the back was the winning play for him. Going into game number 3, I'm very curious if we're going to see him lead that Kyogre for a third time, or if we're going to maybe see him switch it up and keep the Kyogre and Tornadus next to each other in the back.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there was like a huge risk to take there with the Chien-Pao, but I think at the end of the day, the big reward was being able to get the backs.
Exactly.
The backs against the wall together. But it actually wasn't even back against the wall, though. Jessie was looking forward into the future to see that Kyogre would be so well positioned to have the Tornadus and Tailwind next to it. So yeah, like sacrificial.
It was like
Jaguar,
that. You know how in superhero movies they do the back-to-back thing and then the camera spins around when they're like up against the wall?
The superhero and the sidekick?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we saw there.
Tornadus is the superhero and Kyogre is the sidekick.
I think so, because Tornadus really enables Kyogre. But here we go, game number 3. We see a lead adjustment here from both trainers. We actually have Groudon now out on the field, and we're going to see that photosynthesis activate immediately for Raging Bolt.
We are, but this is where Jessie has a really nice position too, where you've got the Tornadus in the front that can just go for the Rain Dance to shut it off, and now that forces Jonathan to go on the back foot to have to pivot out the Groudon if he's expecting some type of play like that. Kyogre could also switch in. Doesn't feel comfortable knowing that you have like the Raging Bolt across the way, but I also love what Jessie is looking at here too. Just getting the speed online and seeing if you can just kind of make something happen.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that if Jonathan wants to keep either the Groudon or the Raging Bolt on the field, you kind of have to commit Terastallization to it at this point unless you're very confident about who Jessie's going to be targeting with that Chien-Pao, as Ice Spinner will do super effective damage to both of these Pokemon in their current state. And I don't think you want to lock your Terastallization turn 1, game 3, given how important that Fire Terastallization was for Groudon in game number 1, but it looks like we're getting a run back, turn 1 Terastallization here, but it's on the Raging Bolt, so it's going to lock in the Water typing.
I think that's okay though, because Raging Bolt with a Water Tera still was able to help resist the Kyogre attacks. So if you're expecting that to be in the back, then this is going to be fine. Also the Helping Hand.
Let's go!
We actually get to see this tech move from the Groudon pay off. Chien-Pao's going to go for Protect though. So Jonathan doing the little fist pump, maybe hoping that you were going to be able to catch the Tornadus. It goes for the Tailwind, but is Jonathan happy about the result of this turn? The Volt Switch with the Helping Hand into the Tornadus is able to get the one-hit knockout, but there is an opportunity here to get a Pokemon in under Tailwind here for Jessie and a reposition here for Jonathan.
Critically, it's the Groudon that's the Pokemon that stays on the field for Jonathan. So yes, he will be able to send in potentially that Flutter Mane, maybe the Amoonguss next to the Groudon to provide support for it. But if it's the Kyogre coming in, you're gonna lose the weather in the process. And I do like that it is the Amoonguss that comes out to play for Jonathan, as a threat of Spore will at least force another Grass-type Terastallization for Jessie, but interestingly enough, it's actually the Zuniga that comes in now, so it's under Tailwind. It's gonna outspeed.
Ooh, okay. This is very interesting.
I like this play a lot.
Terastallization's off the field now for Jonathan.
Yep.
So both of these Pokemon are incredibly susceptible to any sort of Ice-type attack coming through. Both Groudon and Amoonguss gotta kind of play it safe. But can you actually do that? There's a protect on both sides, so Jonathan could do that, could actually switch back in the Raging Bolt if you want to, or reveal what's in the back. But with the Terastallization onto the Qianpao, we get a chance to see a Stellar Terra, but on a very different Pokemon. It's not the Terapagos this time around. We'll just have to see how much this attack is going to do.
I love targeting down the Amoonguss here, though, because it's recognizing that the reason why Kyogre had to commit to that Grass Terra time and time again was partially the Amoonguss and partially the Raging Bolt. And now, thanks to that extra damage boost that the Terastallization gave that Qianpao, it is able to secure that KO, following it up with a Power Whip. Unfortunately, will miss, but Qianpao still has its Focus Sash intact. It's actually the Serena that goes down.
Well, Serena's holding a wide lens, and that's going to be 2 Power Whips that it has now missed in this match alone. But you are in a position now where the Kyogre gets to come in under Tailwind conditions.
Yep.
But Jonathan still has a 4th Pokemon in the back. There is potential for this Groudon to switch out and come back in and
Reset
get the weather
yeah.
in the control.
And not only that, you have the ability here to switch into the Terastallized Water-type Raging Bolt, which we've seen take full health water spouts in the past, and it actually is coming out onto the field now, which makes me wonder, did Jonathan make another Pokemon adjustment in this matchup?
Yeah, but also there's no Terra anymore for the Kyogre.
Yep.
So, and there's no Sarina.
Yep.
You can just Thunderclap at this point.
You can.
So that is something that I think like Jonathan's gonna maybe consider here. It's kind of nice you still have like the natural typing of the Water Terra, but I don't know. Thunderclap just feels so tough.
It does make this play a little bit more difficult for sure, but I would assume that this Kyogre is trained to be bulky enough to take 1 Thunderclap. Maybe not take it well, but at least survive on the field. Yeah, because you're not in the sun. You still have the Rain Boost to help power up an Origin Pulse, or maybe you go straight for Ice Beam here. Groudon's actually staying on the field. So that means that this Terra boosted Sucker Punch is going to do a lot of damage to this Raging Bolt.
That's over 50%. Kyogre going for the Origin Pulse as well.
Oh, anticipating
it is going to go ahead and use the Origin Pulse into the Raging Bolt, but it's nice that you don't just go for the Thunderclap here because its speed drops on both sides.
Yep.
Qianpao is now also going to be able to break its Focus Sash, and you're trying to mitigate a bit of the Tailwind too. And now maybe Kyogre is in Thunderclap range. If you were worried about it before.
I think that enough damage would make the difference here. Jonathan has 1 potential out at this point in time. It really does depend on who that last Pokemon is, but if it is that Fluttermane, you have the opportunity to try and keep the Groudon around long enough so that you can provide that helping hand support to the Fluttermane. Once Tailwind expires, it should outspeed, and I think that's your win con at this point.
All right, well, it's not even going to be the Thunderclap here. This Raging Bolt is just going to go down. The Sucker Punch enough here from that Qianpao to be able to finish off the sliver of HP that it had. Water Spell from the Kyogre too, so Groudon is continuing to play it safe, but yeah, here's the 4th and final, and the Tailwind is gone. So very critically with the speed drops there too, Jonathan is going to be able to have a bit of speed in his favor. The Fluttermane that 4th and final as you were proposing.
The Qianpao has already used up the Stellar Terra boost onto the Sucker Punch. So that means it's not going to do as much damage to the Fluttermane. It might not knock it out at this range depending on how it's trained. You still have the Groudon to worry about, and I do think a Helping Hand Specs boosted Dazzling Gleam is going to be enough damage.
Right, but the Sucker Punch is actually just going to crit and knock out the Fluttermane in 1 hit. This is where we get a chance to see the speed interactions though between the Kyogre and the Groudon. Groudon's going to be able to hit both in the Precipice Blades and a double knockout. So while it looked like it was going to be good as the Fluttermane went down, the double connect on the Precipice Blades is going to seal the deal. And Jonathan Zuniga is going to take this Game 3 and the set and move on to Day 2.
We never saw